A modern game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Is very different from the kind of game you would have witnessed way back in 2002. The Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG has become entirely centralized around using powerful effects and combos to lock your opponent out of the game as early as the very first turn, which is not always how the game used to be played. Back in the old school days of Yu-Gi-Oh!, the main competitive strategies were all focused around the battle phase, battling monsters with varying attack points and grinding each other's resources down until you could determine one single victor. This meant every decision for every card you played mattered, and you could end up facing the consequences of your choices 2 or even 3 turns later. But with Konami's shift in game design philosophy over the last 25 years, Yu-Gi-Oh! Found itself with a big problem. Cards were becoming more and more individually powerful, and they were starting to feel a bit unstoppable for the player who ends up going second in a game. Facing down an imposing field of powerful boss monsters was becoming more and more challenging with every set release. So Konami devised a solution, a new type of card. A type of card that would become the building block for what makes modern Yu-Gi-Oh! The exciting, skill-testing, interaction-based card game that it is today. That solution, obviously, was the Yugioh Handtrap. But today I want to talk about the lesser known side of Handtrap history. Before the Dimension Shifters and the Mulch Armies, before Max C and Ash Blossom even, Konami originally had a different plan for these Handtrap cards. You see, with old school Yu-Gi-Oh! Being so focused around the battle phase, what if there was a type of card that simply helped you win one of these battles when the odds were completely stacked against you? This is the untold story of the battle phase focused origins of Yu-Gi-Oh! Handtraps. So I have a confession to make. A handtrap isn't actually a type of Yu-Gi-Oh! Card. Unlike monsters, spells, and traps, a handtrap is simply a community term for any card that can be activated from your hand to disrupt your opponent in some way or counter some action they're trying to take, usually on their turn. Don't let the term handtrap fool you though. More often than not, handtraps aren't trap cards at all. They usually come in the form of monster cards which discard themselves to the graveyard for some kind of benefit. Why would you design monster cards that are just meant to be discarded from the hand and have no chance of ever seeing the light of day in a battle on the field? I guess it's just one of those things that gives Yu-Gi-Oh! Its unique flavor. Because they can be activated on the very first turn of the game, handtraps allow the player going second to gain various types of advantages when normally they wouldn't have a chance to play any of their cards yet. This is an invaluable upside to handtrap design, and this instant interaction is the main reason they've become such a big part of competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! In the modern day. And yeah, we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, but it's important context to know where we ended up with the modern handtrap design if we're gonna look at where we came from in the first place. The fast-paced environment of modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Basically requires handtraps to have these abilities to negate, destroy, or otherwise disrupt the opponent's plays on the very first turn in order to give the player going second any kind of chance to play the game at all. Well, that and board breakers, which are cards designed to be played going second to help get rid of the stuff your opponent had set up on the first turn, but maybe that's a topic for another video. In the slower paced metas of the early 2000s though, the game wasn't nearly as centralized around these long, complicated combo lines that built gigantic boards. And because of this, handtraps with negations were not nearly as necessary for the health of the game as they are today. Instead, the beginning of handtrap card design was much more focused on the battle phase. This is what a lot of players considered to be the main meat of your turn. And yes, you weren't really playing any cards during the battle phase, but this is where you would destroy opponents' monsters and hopefully deal a good amount of damage to their life points as well. And because the battle phase was so important to old school Yu-Gi-Oh!, this is where Konami focused their design efforts to give players a new opportunity to express themselves with a fresh take on the gameplay loop and allow them to play cards during the battle phase. The main problem being, yeah, most of these effects are much weaker than what we're used to today. But weak effects make a lot of sense because handtraps have been around almost as long as the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Itself. In fact, the very first handtrap that was ever released came out in the game's second set ever, Metal Raiders in 2002. And the one that started us down this handtrap road is none other than Yugi's signature fluffball himself, fan favorite anime monster, Kuriboh. This card reads, discard this card from your hand to the graveyard to make the damage inflicted to your life points by one opponent's monster 0. This effect must be activated during your opponent's battle phase. And now's a good time to mention we'll be looking at the first print of a lot of these older cards, so expect them to read in the signature, old school, overly complicated sort of way. Thankfully, in this case, negating the damage from one opponent's attack is pretty easy to understand. It's not overly flashy or exciting by today's standards, but in a world where your opponents are just slamming down 7-colored fish and Legends, it's definitely not the worst effect in the world. It's pretty easy to find cards in 2002 that are worse than Kuriboh. But sadly, it's also pretty easy to find cards that are better. Kuriboh just didn't quite do enough to really see any amount of play even when it released. While preventing one instance of battle damage isn't a terrible effect, Kuriboh just didn't do anything to actually give you any advantage or progress you in the state of the game. It couldn't prevent damage more than once, didn't summon itself to the field to defend you a little bit, it didn't draw you any cards. Players would much rather just play cards that actually help them win back the board and advance them in the game, as opposed to preventing one single attack from one single opponent's monster. Even if you did want this kind of battle protection effect, you could always just play cards like Mirror Force, which destroyed all your opponent's attacking monsters. There was also cards like Negate Attack, which fully ended the battle phase and stopped all your opponent's monsters from attacking. Or as an even closer comparison, there's Waboku, which protected you from all the attack damage for the turn instead of just one single attack like Kuriboh did. Which, by the way, Waboku is one of those cards that has absolutely crazy wording on its first printing. Any damage inflicted by an opponent's monster is decreased to 0 during the turn this card is activated. Does it make sense to you that this card also protects your monsters from being destroyed by battle? Reading this as a kid, I didn't know that. Apparently stopping your opponent's monsters from dealing damage also stops them from dealing damage to your monsters. Even though in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh, mechanically speaking, monsters don't actually deal or take damage to each other. You only deal damage to life points through the attack values of the monsters. How many old school cards do we have to look at today? My point is, Kuriboh wasn't quite strong enough on its own to make this battle type hand trap a central part of Yu-Gi-Oh's competitive gameplay. But who says he has to be on his own? Kuriboh captured the heart of fans so wholly, Konami dedicated the next 20 years to printing an archetype of Kuriboh's entire extended family. I'm serious. There's over 40 Kuriboh cards in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh today. And not all of them can be considered the same type of battle hand trap as the original Kuriboh was, but I would like to look at the ones that are battle hand traps and see if they can do the original Kuriboh proud by seeing any amount of competitive play. Starting off, we have Rainbow Kuriboh from 2014. This card equips itself to an opponent's attacking monster from your hand, and makes it so they can't attack as long as they're equipped with this card. Also, it has a second effect that if it's in the graveyard when your opponent declares a direct attack, it can special summon itself back to the field to defend you. Honestly, this is a really good upgrade from Kuriboh's original effect. Equipping to a monster meant you had the potential to prevent multiple attacks over multiple turns. And even then, if it did go to the graveyard, it could summon itself back to defend you for one more attack. This all combined and made the card actually see some amount of competitive play. Next up is Sphere Kuriboh from 2015, which is a lot less impressive. You can discard it when your opponent declares an attack to change their monster to defense position. And as a bonus, if you do a ritual summon, you can use it as material from the graveyard. But that pretty much never came up. Sadly, this card has all the same problems that the original Kuriboh did, and just didn't quite generate enough value to be worth a card in your deck. So people really weren't interested in playing it at all. Next is Kuribohs from 2016, which mixed Kuriboh with Monster Reborn. How could that go wrong? This Kuriboh can be discarded at the end of the battle phase to bring back one of your monsters that was destroyed by battle this turn. Also, if it's in the graveyard, when your opponent attacks, you can banish it to special summon any number of Kuriboh monsters from your graveyard. The main problem being it doesn't resummon the monster until the end of the battle phase, meaning you've already taken multiple attacks from your opponent and are probably already dead by that point. As for the second effect, it's pretty much useless. I mean, there's just not really any Kuriboh monsters worth reviving like this. As you can tell from what we've looked at so far, there's never been a competitive Kuriboh-centric deck, so there's just no point in trying to use this card at all. Then we have Performapal Kuriboh in 2019. This card has the effect that you can special summon it from your hand when your opponent declares a direct attack, and change the attack target to Kuriboh itself. Then for that specific battle, you gain life points instead of losing life points when it's attacked. Being the newest card we've talked about so far, the competition for being a playable Yu-Gi-Oh card is just getting steeper and steeper. We're all the way in 2019, and you cannot get away with playing a card like this. We did have a similar card called Draining Shield, which was a trap card that negated an attack and then you gained life points equal to the attack of the monster. And that was actually a competitive card for a decent period of time. But, and this is a big but, Draining Shield works on all attacks, not just direct attacks. And also was printed in 2004. Not 2019. 15 years earlier and Kuriboh had a chance to get a deck slot or two. But these days, there's just no chance. And now coming up is my personal favorite Kuriboh. I promise to review it without bias. It's Magic Kuriboh. Magic Kuriboh from 2022 is a Dark Magician support card that can be discarded to summon a Dark Magician or Dark Magician Girl from your deck or graveyard on a turn where you've taken damage. Then it also adds itself back to your hand if one of your spellcaster type monsters is destroyed on the field. Although Dark Magician has seen a non-zero amount of competitive play over the years, Dark Magician's biggest claim to fame in competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Is just being one half of a Red Eyes Dark Dragoon. The dedicated Dark Magician strategy has always just been a rogue deck that's a fan favorite for people who fondly remember the Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime. And Magic Kuriboh actually isn't even good enough to see play in those rogue decks. I'm sorry, it's just not very good. But look at him. He's cosplaying as Dark Magician. I love him. Moving on, Galactic Kuriboh is next from 2023. And it has a similar effect to Magic Kuriboh where it can summon a Galaxy Eyes Photon Dragon from your deck when you're being attacked. Then, while in the graveyard, it protects one of your Photon or Galaxy monsters from being destroyed by banishing itself. Photon Galaxy was just as much of a rogue deck as Dark Magician, with a slightly more cohesive strategy. But that's not really saying much. And once again, Galactic Kuriboh wasn't part of that strategy at all. The deck's focus is on making big Xyz monsters with dragon and archetypal synergies, and Galactic Kuriboh's effect is just way too slow and not impactful enough to ever be helpful to a deck like that. And last but not least, we have Performapal Bara Kuriboh in 2023. This is a pendulum monster that has the monster effect to special summon it from the hand if one of your monsters is destroyed by battle. While it's on the field, your opponent must target it for attacks before your other monsters. And if it gets attacked, it's switched to attack position at the end of the damage step. Wow. Over 20 years later and we're still getting Kuribohs that can basically only block one attack. I mean, it gets attacked and then goes to attack position, so you're gonna basically take the full damage from the second attack anyway. What is the point of this? I mean, I don't have to tell you this card is bad. It's completely unplayable, of course it is. But can we talk about how cute this outfit is? Clearly, as the years went on and on, Kuriboh was just never able to cement itself as the king of the battle phase that we had all hoped that it would be. In order for a battle phase hand trap to see play, it had to actually impact the game in a way that none of the Kuribohs were able to do. But while all these Kuribohs were being released, there was actually two other hand traps that came into the game that did everything Kuriboh would never be able to do. 2010 was the year we finally got an actual good version of the Kuriboh effect. Swift Scarecrow could discard itself when an opponent's monster declared a direct attack and end the battle phase completely. And Battle Fader did the same thing, except it special summoned itself to the field instead of being discarded, and banished itself when it left the field. And both of these cards are exactly what was missing from these Kuriboh-like effects. Ending the battle phase completely meant you weren't only stopping one attack, you were stopping at maximum 5 attacks from your opponent from your hand with no way to interact with it. Be careful who you call a Wabaku, because they just might grow up to be a negate attack. Of course, these cards immediately found a home in stall strategies like Final Countdown and Exodia, where they could be used to buy a couple extra turns and hopefully get their win condition off. In general though, Battle Fader tended to be a bit more popular than Swift Scarecrow, just because it summoned itself to the field, which was more of an advantage than discarding the card completely to the graveyard. In fact, Battle Fader fit almost perfectly into the Frog Monarch strategy. That's because its main strategy was to use Treeborn Frog's effect to special summon itself back from the graveyard during the standby phase, which could then be used to tribute summon a powerful monarch, all in the same turn. The slight problem this deck had was if you wanted to get the Treeborn Frog to resummon itself, you had to have no spells or traps on your side of the field, which meant that sometimes the deck would be forced into awkward situations where it would have to sub-optimally use the trap cards that it had set, or maybe even not set them from their hand at all. This is why Battle Fader was so perfect. If you had a really strong turn and wanted to commit to the board by setting a bunch of back row, and somehow things went wrong and they destroyed your monsters and were attacking you, you could just summon a Battle Fader. It didn't matter that you had spells and traps set. Battle Fader just needs to summon on a direct attack. And on top of protecting your life points, now you had this backup Treeborn Frog body sitting on your field, and you could still use it to summon your powerful monarchs on your turn. Now don't get me wrong, it wasn't played in every single Frog Monarch list that existed, but it was a good tech option for a very viable competitive deck, making this by far the most competitive card we've looked at so far. It took a lot of effort to get there, but we finally had a way to prevent battle damage using a card with actual gameplay appeal instead of a card with marketing mascot appeal. But this obviously isn't the end of our story. Preventing battle damage is only one thing that can happen in the battle phase, and it wasn't the only effect for battle hand traps that were being worked on at the time. Yes, Kuriboh was busy multiplying into 1,000 fluff balls, and eventually we got Battle Fader, which is the best version of that effect. But also, there was other battle hand traps that were releasing at the time that were doing entirely different things and trying to push the envelope for what a battle hand trap could really do. Let's talk a little bit about Yu-Gi-Oh! Archetypes. Nowadays in Yu-Gi-Oh!, 90% of the effects you're going to activate use the names of cards to link them together and otherwise interact with each other. Searching, summoning, or otherwise upgrading other cards is the name of the game now, and it's all done by looking at the names of the cards themselves. There was a distinct point in Yu-Gi-Oh! Card design where they stopped focusing on creating singular powerful cards and instead started to focus on creating large archetypes that could all work together towards one powerful goal. And believe it or not, this design philosophy started all the way back as we entered the Yu-Gi-Oh! GX era. Elemental Hero, Cyber Dragon, Ancient Gear, you name it. These decks all started doubling down on the card name matters design that we all know and love today. I mean, at the time we'd only seen this in a handful of very specific decks like Toon or Harpy. And who wants to play those? Decks revolving around archetypes were clearly the new toy that was going to be here to stay. And it was at this time we actually started to see hand traps be integrated into the archetypes themselves. First up, we can take a look at Destiny Hero Blade Master. This card was released in 2006 and could be discarded during your opponent's battle phase to boost all your Destiny Hero monsters by 800 attack points. And that's it! Destiny Hero is a fan favorite archetype with cards that would be competitive meta staples for years to come. But as you can imagine, Blade Master was not one of those cards. Like a lot of cards we've looked at so far, Blade Master's effect is just too restrictive to actually be useful. Only being able to use it on your opponent's turn means you can't even build a big board of Destiny Hero monsters and boost them all and try to attack for game. At best, your opponent will attack into one of your monsters, you'll discard it, boost it up, and hopefully destroy the monster that's attacking. But after that, they can see the rest of your monsters are boosted and they won't attack anything else. And on top of that, all the Destiny Hero monsters have such low attack point values anyway, the chance that 800 points is enough to actually change the outcome of a battle is just completely living in a fairy tale. This card is just so not good. But you know what card actually is good? Let's jump ahead a couple years to 2009's Blackwing Kalut the Moonshadow. Fans of the Edison format are sure to recognize this one, as Kalut lets you discard it during the damage step to give one of your Blackwing monsters 1400 extra attack points until the end of the turn. Now that's what I'm talking about! Much bigger boost, either player's turn, and in an archetype that the card quality is actually much higher than Destiny Hero. Which, I mean, I know it's not fair to say Kalut is better just because Blackwings in general are a better archetype, but I mean, compare the cards individually, it's still just a better card, it doesn't matter. 1400 is just a huge boost to give to a monster from the hand, and being able to use it on your turn or your opponent's turn just meant the versatility of this card, along with the powerful boost, was just really, really good. Kalut saw play for as long as Blackwing's strategies were meta relevant, and it even managed to win a world championship in 2009. That's how good this card is compared to everything else we've talked about so far. It's clear that these attack point altering type effects can be really good if they're done well, and this did successfully change the dynamics of the battle phase in the way that Konami had hoped. But limiting it to one single archetype was probably keeping it from seeing as much play as it could have. So what if we made this type of effect more generic? What if we let more decks play an attack-altering type hand trap effect? Well, that would lead us to the most competitive card we've talked about so far. Even more competitive than Kalut. Let's hop on over to 2008's Light of Destruction, where the set's cover card is actually what we're here to talk about. None other than Honest. Honest has the effect that during the main phase, you can return it from the field to your hand. Okay, yeah, we don't really care about that part. It also says that during either player's damage step, if you have a face-up light monster in a battle, you can send Honest from your hand to the graveyard to have your monster gain attack equal to the attack of the monster it's battling until the end phase. Wow. Now that's actually really good. It's hard to overstate how much Honest changed the battle phase of Yu-Gi-Oh! And in terms of the timeline, this is a year before Kalut came out, and 2 years before Swift Scarecrow and Battle Fader. There wasn't exactly much competition for battle phase hand traps at the time. Comparing Honest to Kuriboh seems like some kind of cruel joke. Honest was able to be used on either player's turn, it destroyed the opponent's monster, and it also dealt damage to them equal to the attack of the monster they were battling with. And not to mention, light and dark have historically been the strongest attributes in Yu-Gi-Oh! So Honest was usable in your deck without really having to change much at all. This completely turned Yu-Gi-Oh! Upside down in a brand new way. Suddenly, if your opponent had a light monster on the field, you had to be very, very careful or run the risk of one of your attacks going very, very wrong very, very quickly. Honest was played all over the place, specifically in light heavy decks like the brand new Lightsworn that premiered in the very same set in the TCG. And the worst part was, it was like Schrodinger's Honest. It didn't actually matter if your opponent had Honest in their hand or not, because just by having a light monster, you had to assume that they did have the Honest. Even if they didn't, you had to play as if they did. It's a card that's so good you don't even need the card for it to be good. But with the light attribute beginning to dominate the battle phase with Honest leading the charge, lurking in the shadows, there was a dark side. A dark battle hand trap released that would give Honest a run for its money and change the battle phase once again in an entirely brand new way. This is Gorz, the Emissary of Darkness. This card released in 2009 with an even more impressive stat line than Honest at a whopping 2700 attack. And that's actually gonna matter for this card, believe it or not, once we read the effect. Gorz can summon himself from the hand if the player takes damage while having no cards on the field. If he's summoned from effect damage, he deals the same amount of damage back to the opponent. Or if he's summoned from battle damage, he creates a token with stats equal to the damage you took. And just like that, the battle phase has been changed forever. Again, Special summoning 2 big bodies during the battle phase was often enough to turn a losing game back into your favor. And honestly, it was immediately clear from the second Gorz came out that this card was going to be a force to be reckoned with in competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! The secondary effect from effect damage was also nice, but let's be honest, effect damage is not nearly as common of a mechanic as battle damage is in Yu-Gi-Oh! Yes, the one downside was you had to control no cards to activate his effect, but the very common activation requirement of taking battle damage, plus the huge tempo swing of getting an entire extra body onto your field that usually was quite big, I mean, suddenly, battle hand traps were an essential part of the competitive game. Gorz was simply a very, very strong card that could go into basically any deck in the format. And because of the way the effect worked, it actually created an entirely new metagame about which monsters you attack with first during the battle phase. If your opponent controlled no cards at all, it was always possible that a Gorz could be coming. That means it made sense to attack with your smallest monster first and work your way up to the largest attack, so if the Gorz player wanted to get the largest token possible, they had to wait and take all the attacks in order first. But also, if your biggest monster was smaller than the 2700 attack that Gorz had, sometimes it was worth it to just drop the Gorz anyway and let you kill the smaller token just to save yourself from getting hit by the final attack. As you can see, this was a whole new dynamic for the battle phase. And honestly, I think this made Yu-Gi-Oh! 10 times more exciting. So I'm sure you can see why Gorz and Honest both saw frequent competitive play for a number of years after their release, with Gorz slightly being more popular just because it didn't have the attribute restriction like Honest did. But these also weren't the only battle hand traps to come out at this time. And there was actually one more card that I would love to talk about with these two since it's so similar. That card is Tragodia. Tragodia was a 2009 Shonen Jump promo card that saw a lot of experimentation since it had a very similar effect to Gorz. Tragodia summons itself when you take battle damage, but doesn't require you to have an empty field like Gorz does to activate. It has a variable attack and defense value that's equal to 600 for every card in your hand while it's on the field, and it also has the effect of taking control of an opponent's monster by discarding a monster with the same level from your hand. Lastly, it can change its own level to be equal to the level of a monster in your graveyard once per turn. None of these effects seem that crazy on their own, but it's when you combine them all into one card that you start to be able to make some pretty crazy plays. The variable attack and defense is more of a downside than an upside. In general, you want to be playing the cards out of your hand to get their effects instead of holding them back just to give your monster an attack boost. But the other effects are actually pretty good. At the time, synchro strategies were pretty dominant, and taking an opponent's synchro boss monster away from them could sometimes just win the game on the spot. And this mind control effect is permanent, by the way. Like, you don't have to give it back at the end of the turn, you just get the monster forever. You can discard a dead Gorz in your hand that you weren't going to use anyway, and take an opponent's Blackwing Armor Master. Forever. Sounds like a good deal to me. And also, if you were running synchro monsters of your own, which at the time you probably were, Tragodia was an easy to summon monster that could change its level to be the perfect synchro material for any situation you needed. Which is not nothing. It's quite good. And as a final point, I mean, not to hype up Frog Monarch again, but I mean, the deck is cool and fun and competitive, okay? I like it. Tragodia also could fit into Frog Monarchs because it didn't have the empty field restriction like Gorz did. Similarly to how Battle Fader was a backup for Treeborn Frog if you had stuff on your field, Tragodia worked in pretty much the same way. It summoned itself more consistently than Gorz did and could be a body that, at the very least, could be used to tribute for a Monarch summon on your turn. At first glance, Tragodia may seem weak in comparison to Gorz, but with the right setup, there's actually a lot that Tragodia can do. So Tragodia, Gorz, and Honest all came together as the holy trinity of battle hand traps. And they were completely dominating the metagame to the point where every single one of them went down to one copy on the Forbidden and Limited list. If that's not a sign of some strong cards, I don't know what is. These three cards will always be remembered for proving how strong a battle hand trap can be. And being such a dominant force in the metagame for so long, it's surprising that to this day, these are still the strongest battle hand traps we've ever received in the history of Yu-Gi-Oh! Or at least, they would be, if not for this one other card. Let's jump ahead a bit to 2017. This is a world of Yu-Gi-Oh! Where battle phase focus effects are completely forgotten. Decks are filled with unlimited searches, endless extra deck monster spam, and unbreakable boards ready to take on anything an opponent could possibly throw at them. And it's at this point we received a card so menacing, so diabolical, it still strikes fear into the hearts of Yu-Gi-Oh! Players today. And this time, it's actually a trap card. This is Evenly Matched. At the end of the battle phase, if your opponent controls more cards than you do, you can make your opponent banish cards from their field face down so they control the same number of cards as you do. If you control no cards, you can activate this card from your hand. An unbelievable card that can be activated from your hand with the best type of removal effect in all of Yu-Gi-Oh! And yes, technically speaking, it's more of a board breaker than a hand trap, but it caps off the video nicely, don't you think? To explain the effect a little bit more, when you activate Evenly Matched from your hand, it counts as being one card you control on the field. So if you go straight to the end of your battle phase while controlling no other cards and activate Evenly Matched, your opponent must banish all cards they control face down except for one. And that's borderline impossible for most decks to come back from after they just spent all their resources setting up their field on their first turn. Also, as I sort of mentioned, banishing cards face down is the only way in Yu-Gi-Oh! To ensure those cards are never ever making their way back into this game. So this effect is really, really good. And double also, Evenly Matched gets around a lot of protection effects because it actually makes the opposing player banish the cards instead of banishing the cards with the effect of the card itself. Does that make any sense? No? Let me break it down for you. Basically, because of the way Evenly Matched is worded, the opposing player banishing the cards is different than if the effect of Evenly Matched was banishing the cards itself. So, for example, cards that can't be targeted, cards that can't be banished by card effects, or cards that are even unaffected by trap cards can all still be banished when you activate Evenly Matched because it's the player doing the banishing and not the trap card itself. This card is crazy. It can be played from the hand, it makes the cards completely unrecoverable for your opponent, and it gets around pretty much every form of protection that exists in the game. It's simply the best going second card that has ever been printed in the history of Yu-Gi-Oh! And my oh my, how far we've come. From preventing one instance of battle damage with Kuriboh, to banishing our opponent's entire field face down. These cards that activate during the battle phase have come a long, long way. But even still, today, they're simply outclassed. We have modern hand traps that can be activated during the main phase, during the draw phase, and these are cards that prevent your opponent from doing the most basic mechanics in the card game that they're trying to play. You just tell them, no, you're not allowed to search, you're not allowed to summon, you're not allowed to send a card to your graveyard. But I guess that's probably a story for another video. Thanks for watching.